and welcome to the digital job site where the boards are straight, the weather's great, and there really is a board stretcher. This video is part 3 of the How to Cut Lumber with SketchUp series, and I'm going to use a shed model from previous tutorials for the purpose of cutting and fitting board and batten siding to the shed. And the methods I use here are adapted from parts 1 and 2 that show various ways of cutting wood with SketchUp, and we'll use those methods and a couple other ones to get this siding to fit nicely around corners and gables and soffits, etc., windows and doors on this shed. Along with the cutting methods, an important part of this tutorial will be showing how groups and groups of groups can be used to simplify and organize this siding process. I'm going to go in and pin the toolbars up here and shut a few things off, i.e. the fog and the shadows, to keep the model sped up. I'm going to go into layers and hide the decorations for now, which will simplify and clean things up, speed the model up. And then close the window with our little dynamic component finger there. Then I can back up and select this group which contains all the board and batten siding for this shed. Just going to move it out 200 inches. And this shows how I organized the siding into groups and groups within groups to make the cutting process easier. For now, I'm just going to hide this batch of geometry and start over again with the board and batten siding process from the beginning. If we go into layers and hide a few things again, like take out the doors and windows and the OSB sheeting, and see this is basically just a shed model, the way a shed would be built. I have the soffit material installed and the framing up. And if we were to put on an OSB layer, it'd look something like that. And then the doors and windows would be in place before the board and batten siding goes up. So we'll basically start from this point and go forward with the process. And because we want to be able to manipulate groups of pieces of siding and battens, but they don't really need to have attributes of components, we're going to work by starting with a group to represent a piece of siding. So I'm going to draw a rectangle here, and I want it to be 0.75 comma 9.25 to represent basically a 1x10 piece of siding. I'm going to pull this up some distance here. Let's go 144, which would make a 12-foot 1x10. And I'm going to triple click this to select everything and then make this a group. And this one board here will be the basis for all the boards and battens on the shed. As I said earlier, we don't need the attributes of components for this siding in this case, and they need to be grouped. So I want to make this look like a piece of siding to start off with, because after it's in place, I can't change a group of groups in the same way that I could change a group of components. I think that'll make sense as the video goes on. So here's a piece that we're going to use for a piece of siding. I'm going to go into materials and we're going to select wood, and we're going to paint this thing so it looks like a piece of siding from the get-go. And that gives it a somewhat the look of a piece of cedar siding, which will work nicely. So we can start with this one board and go forward to put all the siding and battens on this shed. I'm just going to select this piece by the lower corner here and just touch it on the corner of that OSB to put this piece of siding in place like we want it. And having this board set up as a group makes this next step very easy. I'm just going to take the line tool. While we're in group edit mode, I'm just going to draw a line on this soffit. Click, click. And just so you can see what's been done there, I'm going to move this out in the red direction 20 inches. And if we zoom back in, you can see there's a line drawn across the edge of this board, and what that does is allow us to cut this off to fit the soffit. Now we can just move this back in 20 inches. And I'm watching for the red axis direction, typing in 20, enter. And that puts a perfectly cut board right up underneath that soffit. And we want to duplicate these out across the shed, but I want to keep them in a group to make them manageable. So what I do is double click to get into this group that we already created, and I'll triple click inside that group to select everything about this board, and I'll right click and make that a group. So what that does is give us a group that if we double click inside of it, there's another group. So now we can manipulate this siding board inside the group, and we want to distribute these out across this wall of the shed. So I'm going to take the move tool, hit control, and then let's just move this over, let's say 10 inches. And then if I type in 10x enter, it'll put 10 copies spaced at 3/4 of an inch. So what we end up with is boards that are evenly spaced, but we wouldn't get a full board on this end. It'd need to be ripped off to be flush with the front of the shed. So a better way to do that process, I'll just hit the back arrow there, is we'll take a board, select one board, take the move tool, hit control, and we're going to drag a copy of this piece of siding up to the front of the shed. Just index it with that corner. Once it's placed there, I'll just type enter to set the distance, and then type /7 enter, and that will equally space the 7 pieces with the same gap in between. But this gap is going to be too much to cover with a normal batten. So if I haven't touched any other keys, I can type /8 enter, and you can see how the gaps got smaller because it added another board. And I don't like the width of that gap, still a little wide, so I'm going to type in /9 enter, and I think that that'll work. That's not too big of a gap, and it'll cover nicely with the batten. And we have all this siding. If we click outside, all this siding is in a group, so these boards all work together, which will make the next step easier. The next step will be the battens. So I'm going to double click to get inside this group, and inside that group are all these individual pieces of siding. So I'm just going to select all those, right click, and say make a group. So what we have is a group with a group inside of it, and inside that second group is the siding board. So I'm going to double click to get into that, and then select one of these boards and go Control C or copy that piece, and I'll click once to get outside of that group of siding boards. Then go up here to edit and select my favorite shortcut. It's called paste in place. So I have this siding board that's pasted in place, and we want to move it. So what I want to do is zoom way in and move this so that the long point of the board meets the short point of this other board, like that. Because this is the orientation for the battens. So we're going to go inside this group, which was a piece of siding, and we're going to make it into a batten with the push-pull tool. I'll just shorten this up so it's flush on the bottom. And these were 9 1/4 inches wide. So I'm just going to push this back, 7 enter, and that'll give us a 2-inch board. Let's make them 2.5. So I'm going to pull it back out 0.5. So now if we look at the width of this batten, you can see it's 2 3/4. I did my math wrong, so I'm just going to bump this in 1/4 inch, 0.25. And there's no real set width for a batten, but 2.5 inches would be reasonable. So we've got one batten put in place here, and I want to center the battens up over the grooves in the siding. So I'm just going to draw a line in between 2 pieces of siding, like that. I'm going to take this batten and move it by grabbing the center point and moving it to the center point of this little line. And on the bottom of the board, I'm just going to put a little tick mark from this corner out. Let's just go 0.25, 1/4 inch line. Go outside the board group. Click once to get outside the batten group, and then I'm going to select that little line that I put in there and delete that. So now to replicate the battens across the side of the shed, I'm just going to take this one, move, Control, and grab it by the tick mark here and move it to our gap here. Go enter, and 12x enter. Oops, I made too many, so what? So I'm just going to select these on the end and get rid of them. So now we have these siding battens inside of our wall siding group. And to select those, it would have been quicker if I would have grouped those battens into a group before this stage, but I didn't. So I'm just going to move this siding out 40 inches. That makes it easy to select this batten. These battens, right click, make those into a group, and now I can push this siding back where it belongs. 40 inches, enter. So now we have a group with the siding boards, a group with the battens, and both of those are inside this siding wall group. And the beauty of this is I can now take the move tool and the Control key and take this whole wall of siding, move it over this way, and following that red axis, I can just drop it anywhere. Take the scale tool, pick this little center mark, and just flip this through itself, -1, enter, and we get siding for the opposite side of the shed. You can just move that over and put it in place. So those are the steps to do board and batten siding on the eave side of a shed or structure. And next we'll go and do the gable ends, which are a little bit different. When that's done, we'll go back through and trim the boards and battens to fit around the window. And you'll see at that point why I thought it was more efficient to make this siding as groups instead of components. So to do board and batten siding on these gable ends, I'm going to use the same process, only different. What I mean by that is we're going to put the boards in one group, the battens in another group. And the cutting process is a little bit different because each board is cut differently, whereas each one of these was cut the same on the top. So I'm just going to go into this group twice, grab this piece of siding here and copy it with a Control-C and then click to get out of the group. Then go Edit, Paste in Place. And then what I'm going to do is rotate this board from this corner, rotate it 90 degrees. And when it's stubborn, I'll just type in 90, Enter to get it to park where I want it. And then take the Move tool again. Let's just slide this guy over till it's flush with the siding on the outside here. And the board's cut all wanky, but that's okay. We're just going to go into this group, select the top of the board, and then I'm just going to drag up, just make this board go up. And because I'm using the Move tool and not the Push-Pull tool, I have to pay attention to the axis to make sure it's going straight up and down. And we're just going to move it up some distance. That's going to be good. And to clean it up, I'm going to just draw a line across the edge, take the Push-Pull tool, and trim that board off nice and square on the top. So right now I'm going to triple click to select everything in this group. I'm going to right click and make this a group so that we have a group with a group inside of it. And now we can replicate these pieces across the face of the shed by taking the Move tool, hitting Control, drag this across till it's flush on the other side, hit Enter, /7, Enter, and I don't like that, /8, Enter, and I don't like that, /9, Enter. Okay, we'll do that again, /9, which gives us good spacing of these boards across the shed. Now that we have these boards all set up as groups, I'm going to back up a step and make a cutting plane so that all these boards can be trimmed at once. And to do that, I'm outside of all the groups that we have. I'm going to take this rotated rectangle tool. I'm going to click on 3 points to get a plane. So we're going to go up here under the soffit and take this point. I'm going to take this point and then one at the top here. Right here. And that'll give us a rectangle that represents the face of the gable end overhang soffit. So I'll double click that, hit Move and Control. We're just going to move a copy of this out here. And I want to stay in the red direction, but the distance doesn't matter. So I just kind of move around until I get a red line and drop it. Then take the Scale tool. I'm going to make this a mirror image of itself by dragging it to -1. While it's still selected, I can take the Move tool and drag it back, looking for the red axis again. When I get it in the red axis, hold down the Shift key and then bring it back to the center. Now, by holding Shift and double clicking, by holding Shift and triple clicking, all the geometry of those two pieces is connected. So I'm just going to move it out towards the front of the shed. Let's just go 100 inches. All right, so there's the cutting plane. And now this is the group that has our siding in it. So I'm just going to move it out 100 inches also in the red direction. The green direction. 100, Enter. And now you can see that that makes all these boards and this cutting plane intersect. And it's important that the bounding edges of this cutting plane are not in line with the surface of the siding. In other words, I don't want this cutting plane to be lined up like this, where the line's actually on the surface of what we're cutting, because that really complicates the cutting process that we're going to do next. So I'm going to use the back arrow key to move that out. All right, so we've got 2 cutting planes for the gable soffit, and then inside this group, we've got groups of groups. So I'm going to click out, I'm going to triple click this cutting plane. While it's selected, I'm going to go Control-C, and then I'm actually going to delete it. Go inside this group and double click to get inside the group of groups. I'm going to select everything in the group and explode it. And then I'm going to go Edit, Paste in Place, and put our cutting plane in here. And you can see that when I click on any of these surfaces of the siding, the whole face of the siding is one plane, and this plane itself is still separate. So what we have to do is zoom out, select everything, right click and say intersect faces with selection. And what that does is it breaks everything up. So now there's a top half of the siding and a bottom half. All these edges are separated by this cutting plane. So let's get rid of the cutting plane, and this is why it's important to make sure that this line isn't laying on one of the faces, because I can select this face, shift this face, and delete those. And now by triple clicking on this line, I can make the whole thing disappear with one mouse click. And then by dragging across the top of the siding and hitting delete, we've chopped the top of those all wonderfully off at the plane of the gable end soffit. So if I zoom out, select this in the materials tab, grab the eyedropper, take the face of this siding and plank it on the top, then we actually painted the ends of the siding so that they're cut. And we can take this whole siding group, slide it in 100, enter, and paste it right back on the front of the shed, and everything is cut and fit perfectly. If we go in here to the layers and take out fascia and soffit, you can see how all the boards are trimmed nice and even with just enough space for the fascia or for the soffit to be put in place. I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to select these three groups before I get any farther, and then I'm going to make those a group. So we've got to do some drilling down anytime we work on these pieces, but with all these things grouped and regrouped, it really helps to make this cutting fitting process simpler. The next step we'll do is add the battens on the end of this building. So I'm going to take our siding group, double click, and take our gable end siding group, and I'm just going to move it out here 100 inches so that it's easy to see and work on. I'm going to go inside this group, and let's take this piece of siding here. Say Control C, click once to get outside of that, edit, paste in place. So let's move it out so we can make it into a batten. And while it's all selected, I'm going to right click and make it a group so I don't get in trouble. And we want to make a batten 2.5 inches wide again. So I am just going to put a line in here at 2.5 inches and draw a line on it. Right down here. And then we'll take the push-pull tool and make that board into a batten. This one should work nicely for us. While we're at it, I am just going to stretch this way down, make it plenty long. Don't have to worry about that later. Let's delete this guideline. And so we have a batten. I'm going to triple click the batten and make it a group. And I'm just going to draw a line between these two pieces of siding here. Take this batten group and move it, holding it by the center point and moving it to the center point of this line. I'm going to select that line and delete it. And then we'll go inside this batten group and draw our little tick mark here. Make that 0.25. And we'll click to get out of the batten group. And now we'll take that batten and move it with the control to copy it. We can take it by this tick mark and put it up here. Enter. 4x enter ought to do it. That'll work just fine. And because we're going to be working with these pieces inside this group, I'm just going to select them all and explode them. And then let's just shorten them up. If you had a whole bunch of these, there'd probably be a quicker way to do this by changing around the process, but there's only a few of them here. So we'll just go this way. That gives us those battens. I want to trim the top of this center batten off, so I'm just going to find the center point. And I'm going to hover over this corner and swing across. And with the color of our siding, it's tough to see, but there is a red inference line going across there, so I know that that's going to be a nice even match, and I can push that off. So we can go in here and take these pieces, move and copy them. We're just going to slide them off here in the distance. I want to stay in the red direction, but it doesn't matter how far I move them. Take the scale tool and zoom way in and pick the center handle and take these boards, get them to go to -1. Now we're going to move them as a group by one of the tick marks. We can just slide this in here, and voila, We have all the battens on the siding. There's the batten group, there's the siding group. If I click once, let's see, okay, so I didn't put those inside a group within a group, but I'm going to do that now. With both of those selected, we'll go make a group. Now we can move this back 100 inches, our magic number, which is wonderful. That's still selected. I'm going to say move and control to copy that. I'm going to slide it out this way, scale it. You could do the same thing by flipping these around with the rotate tool, but I like to use the scale tool. Move that -1. Still selected. Take this and move it in and stick it on the back side of the shed. By clicking out and selecting this group, slide this out 200 inches, you can see what we've done here is created all the boards and all the battens with the appropriate rake angle on the ends, all even spacing, everything's flushed up and trimmed. And the next step will be to trim the boards and battens around the door and the window. So to trim the boards and battens around the window and door, we'll just start with the window. We're going to double click to get into our siding group. And we have this wall siding. I'm going to double click to get into that group and select the batten group and just move them out of the way. Let's just slide them this way 100 inches. So they're out of the way. Now we can work on these boards. So by double clicking and get into the group of board groups, I'm going to take these two that need to be chopped completely out and I'm going to explode them. While everything's still selected, I'm going to right click and make it a group so that I can work on these without affecting other things. And a simple way to do this, I'm just going to grab the bottom geometry of these boards, take move and control, and just slide this up until we hit the bottom of the window. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to the axis so that it stays in the blue axis, which is vertical, and place one right at the outside of the window. And then we're going to go move and control again, take that exact same geometry and move it up to the top of the window, paying attention to the blue axis again, and drop one right on top of the window. And then we could do a number of things. We could just push these out of the way like that to get rid of them, or we can just select them and delete them. But that cuts the boards at the window for height. To trim the two boards for the sides of the windows, I'm going to select the two, right click and explode. With them still selected, I will make them a group and go into group edit mode. Now let's just cut these guys out. I'm going to take the rectangle tool, click on this corner of the window up here, and then down on this bottom corner. And you can't see it, but what that's done is isolated the geometry on the corner, so I can just push this piece back and that disappears. Do the same thing on this other side. Zoom in, click on this corner, click on this corner, and I'm going to triple click and take this board out of its place so you can see what's going on here. I'm just going to move this out. The red directions go 20 inches. And you can see how that rectangle isolated the part of the window. Now I can push this out of the way and the board is notched to fit around the window. So if I triple click it and move it back to the building 20 inches, we have both of those boards notched to fit around the window. So with the siding boards cut out around the window, the next step is to cut the battens. So we'll go into our siding group, go into our side siding group and take the batten group and slide those in to where they belong at 100 inches. And then go into the batten group, take 3 of these battens and explode them and make them a group, and then explode the group so we're not messing with other geometry in the process here. So next I'm just going to take the bottom geometry of these boards with the control key, slide it up in the blue axis, hold down shift, and then click it to the bottom of the window, move and control, take another copy and get to the top of the window. And then we can just take the push-pull tool and push these out of the way to cut them off. And then let's see if we can, let's do it this way. I'm going to grab this line and the line on this edge, move, control. You can't even see the lines, but they're selected and copied. I'm just going to move them over in the green direction and stick them on the side of this batten. And we have separated a face, so we can just slide this out of the way over to the edge of our window. And in real life, we'd probably just slide this batten over so that it didn't have this skinny little sliver of a notch on the side. But hey, this is SketchUp and that piece will never split. With the battens on the side done here, our window will operate again. Presto. Next, we'll trim the battens around the door, which is pretty much the same procedure that we just used. So I'm going to go back, select the batten group and just the move tool, not the control key, and slide this out 100 inches so that they're out of the way. And let's trim these siding boards. When we go into this siding board group with a double click, we're reminded that this is already free geometry. These aren't grouped inside of here. So I'm going to triple click each of these 4 boards that need to be cut out. It's important to triple click them all to get all the front, back, and edge faces. Now I'll right click and make that a group. And by going into that group, now you can see we've isolated the geometry we're working on. Draw a box around the bottom with the move tool and the control key, and take one of these bottom edges by a corner, slide it up in the blue direction and park it at the bottom of the door. Hit move and control again. Slide these up carefully in the blue direction. Hold down the shift and index it to the top of the door. And you can tell if you did the steps right because these faces will be separated top and bottom. So with that done properly, we can just select everything in the middle and delete it, which gives us boards trimmed to fit around the door. So I'm going to go in this batten group. And these battens are also free geometry. We'll do this a little different, and I'm going to take and draw a rectangle around the door. Now I'm inside the batten group geometry, but I'm going to draw a rectangle over around the door, getting the whole frame, and you can see we have a plane here. Now let's double click this rectangle and move it. I'm going to move it over this way 200 inches. Let's pull this back a few inches. Well, how about a couple feet? Pull it forward a few feet. So we have a big old rectangle that's 200 inches going the wrong direction, and I'm just going to move it back 100 inches. So that represents where the door is going to fit in this model. So if we select everything in this active group, right click and intersect faces, we'll get the proper behavior of cutting this out. We can delete away our cutting box, and then let's just take the push-pull tool, notch these out. And the push-pull tool remembers the last action it took. So we trimmed all those battens out. Now let's take this group, just slide it over 100 inches. And I decided to do that a different way just because I'm lazy, and to just give you an idea of some other tricks you can use for this sort of work and save on the tedium of drawing little lines here and there and everywhere for drawing and cutting this type of material. The last step is going to be to put corner battens on here, which we will do next. To add trim boards on the corners, we'll just use battens, and the steps are pretty straightforward from here, and we can just use some of our existing geometry, in this case one of these battens. Just going to move a copy it over to the front, go to the back, select and move a copy of this batten to the back. And while we're in here, I'm just going to select these 2 battens and go Control C. And because I didn't set this up as components in the first place, the changes I made on one side aren't applying to the other side. But the steps are pretty few to make the change, so I just paste in place the battens from the other side. Just going to move them over in this direction, take the scale tool and reverse them to get the angle cuts right on the top. -1, enter, and then move these into place. That gets that job done, and we can go into the battens on the front of the shed. And let's just take this guy with the triple click and move a copy of him to this outer edge. Grab the corner point and move it right to this spot on the angle. Then we can push-pull this up there. And then let's triple click this batten, move and copy it for the other side. Flip the cut at the top with the scale tool, going -1. Move him into place like that. With that one selected, I will hold shift and triple click the other one, Control C, click out of that group, get into the siding group for the back. Here's the battens. We want to be in that group, so we're going to paste in place the ones in the front and just move these guys to the back. Bada bing, bada boom. That's all done. So that is some of the methods I would use for putting siding on a building. The configuration of the building and the different cutout challenges that you encounter will be pretty much unlimited, but these methods work for quite a few of the conditions that you would run into on a building or a modeling project. So let's open up the door here. Let's swing this open 80 degrees. Open up the window. I get a kick out of that. We'll put our pegboard back inside, add the decorations, and by closing layers we can turn on the shadows, and we'll throw in the fog just to get wild and crazy. So there you have it. I hope that gives you a pretty good idea of ways to speed up an otherwise tedious process of making a whole bunch of cuts on a whole bunch of pieces of digital lumber to get what I think is a pretty decent representation of how a shed with board and batten siding would look. So thanks for stopping by the digital job site. I hope you find this video helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment in the video. If you like it, throw me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I would appreciate you joining the group. Thanks for watching.